Hello, I'm Patrick Daly and I'm one of the team at the Rural Doctors Association of Australia. Each year, RDAA and the Australian College of Rural and Remote Medicine offer excellence awards that recognise some outstanding rural generalist doctors and some inspiring future doctors as well. I've been lucky enough to spend time chatting with 4 of our awards recipients for this podcast series. Today's podcast features Dr Hamish Steiner, the RDAA Rural Doctor of the Year for 2021. Hamish has lived and worked as a doctor in Cooma in the New South Wales Snowy Mountains region for nearly 30 years and stepped in last year to save the solo general practice in the remote town of Bombala, about an hour's drive away. Before I begin talking with Hamish, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we meet on across Australia as we listen to this podcast. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander listeners who may be joining us. Hamish, congratulations on receiving the RDAA Rural Doctor of the Year award for 2021. I understand the news came during a particularly challenging week in Cooma.
Yeah, it's always a challenging week in Cooma, but more so that week. Yeah, there's 2 practices in town, and the other practice was in lockdown that had a COVID positive person in the surgery.
So tell me about your childhood. Were you raised in a rural town?
Yeah, not really. I've got a lot of family who are sort of up from New Zealand originally. I've got a lot of family who work on farms and are farmers over there and things, and sort of used to go on holidays to farms. And I grew up in West Auckland, which isn't really rural. It sort of maybe was when I first was growing up there. But yeah, and I've always liked sort of rural areas and things like that. And I think it wasn't so much a love of rural things, more of a hate of big city hospitals than anything, actually.
So what got you interested in medicine as a career choice at the start?
I wasn't really super interested in it. I was looking at a whole pile of things, and really I got the marks from school and I was eligible to get into medicine, so I thought I'll try it and see how it goes. I was wondering about that or engineering or a whole pile of different things, but I had some friends who are doing medicine as well, and they sort of talked me into it, said try this, so I did.
And so what was the point at which you really thought this is the career for me, and I'm interested not only in medicine but in general practice and also procedural medicine?
Probably maybe second year in the hospital. Most of my hospital work in New Zealand, I really tried to go to smaller hospitals, places like Rotorua or Whangarei up in Northland, and I really enjoyed working in those smaller places. Was a lot more hands-on. The sort of senior staff were much more friendly. You got to do a lot more. The staff in general just seemed to be happier there than they did in the big hospitals. The big hospitals really seemed very pressured, just not as fun places to work. So did that, and from Rotorua we got an offer to come and work in South Australia. Went to South Australia and really enjoyed that there, and then decided to do some anaesthetics and obstetric training, and with doing that sort of paved the way to get into rural medicine.
Was that unusual at the time to be looking for rural hospitals to undertake your intern years?
Yeah, I think so. I think most people really wanted to stay in big cities. I really enjoyed being in smaller places. I found it way more interesting, a lot more autonomy, but a lot better relationships, I think, with the senior specialists and things who were in the hospitals. You got to do a lot more responsibility. It's just a lot more interesting.
So once you were in SA, did you look for rural hospital placements at that stage, or did that come later when you first moved to Cooma?
That was later. We did some anaesthetics and obstetrics at Flinders. That's probably the last big hospital experience I had, and I actually really liked Flinders Hospital. It was a nice hospital to work at. People there were lovely. And then worked up in the Riverland doing some GP training there. And interesting now, it seems like a crazy thing to do, but we actually used to be able to put free adverts in Australian Doctor magazine, and we put an advert in, as my other half's a doctor as well, saying husband and wife doctors with anaesthetics and obstetrics looking for some rural work. And not surprisingly, we got a lot of replies, but one of them was from Andrew Egan here in Cooma. And he sort of rang us up, and I thought, oh, Cooma, I remember that name. I've driven through here once to come skiing. I bet they never have trouble getting doctors here, being so close to the ski field. So it was a bit of a surprise to be rung up. So we came over here for a visit and decided we'd come and work over here, and that was 25 years ago.
So once you arrived in Cooma, was it as you had expected in terms of the style of practice that was available, and what's kept you there for 25 years?
It really was very much like we hoped it would be. Really nice doctors to work with, very supportive, great practice to work with and things as well. I think the practice just before we got here had gone through a lot of tragedy. That had a doctor there who had died of cancer very young, and that had really had an impact on the doctors in the town, especially in the practice we joined up to. I think they'd really reevaluated their sort of work-life balances and things as a result of that. And everyone sort of decided that the work-life balance was a bit more important. So made sure everyone had holidays and sort of half a day or a day off a week and things like that. That's stayed true to us, really. We've kept that going through the practice. We tend to try and keep things reasonably balanced and have a nice, interesting, friendly practice to work in.
Was that unusual 25 years ago to be looking at that work-life balance? Because that's been an issue that's really cropped up in the past 5 to 10 years, particularly for rural medicine. Were you leading the way in that regard, do you think?
Yeah, I don't know if we're leading the way. It certainly wasn't me. I was very junior when I joined. It was just like, this is how it is. We expect you to have a day off a week so that you can work hard the rest of the time. And I think for the first couple of years, that day off each week was pretty sacred. Like, it was very hard to sort of even come into the surgery or do anything on your day off. Occasionally emergencies would crop up and things like that, but it really was pushed as a thing. I don't know if it was that unusual at the time. It might have been, but we certainly appreciated it.
So in terms of your journey as a rural doctor, what have been the most challenging bits and also what have been the most rewarding bits?
Yeah, I think the challenging bits is always coming across unexpected things or very stressful things. So when I first came here, we used to have to transport patients by ambulance up to Canberra, and that was always pretty exciting. And there was a few trips in the back of ambulances that were very, very exciting. So it's probably the more stressful end of things. Doing procedural medicine, doing anaesthetics and obstetrics, that always generated a few interesting things as well. And sometimes very stressful, but often very rewarding as well. I think the most rewarding things is really being able to offer comprehensive care to people. So you look after them in the community, you can look after them in hospital and get them better. And just that more sort of holistic look where you can look at the whole person rather than just one of their organs. Look at what might be a better option for them. We often find that even now we get patients who come into our hospital here and you look at their medications, you can pretty much pick which specialist has put them on various things. And you can go through and go, okay, well, that makes complete sense from a cardiac point of view to be on these medications. But when you actually balance it out against everything else the patient's got going on, perhaps there are other things that might be a better medication for them. So it's still really rewarding. I still enjoy that part of it.
And in terms of the practice mix and the hospital mix, has that changed much for you in the past 25 years?
Yeah, it has. The hospital's got a lot busier. So 25 years ago, we would be on call for the hospital for 24 hours and we'd work in the rooms and come back and forth to the hospital. And the hospital's we've got so busy now that that's not even possibly an option. So at the hospital now, we mainly do sort of 8 to 10 hour shifts, and we have probably 4, even 5 doctors working over a 24-hour shift at the hospital through the emergency department, just because things have got busier. The hospital can do a lot more. When I first came here, we didn't have a CT scanner in the hospital. Now we do. So there's a lot more things we sort out here at the hospital. There's a lot more patients who come here with unknown things going on. We can diagnose them and we can decide to either keep them here or to send them to Canberra or Bega. 25 years ago, it was very hard to do a lot of that diagnosis, and they would just have to go to another hospital to be diagnosed. So there's a lot more things we keep here and sort out locally.
So would you say it's been an expansion of services in that regard?
Yeah, definitely. There's just a lot more things that we do. There's some things we don't do as much of that have become more specialist sort of areas, but I think by and large we keep a lot more things here than we used to.
So is there any particular story or event that stands out to you from your time in Cooma so far?
I don't know. There's lots of stories and things, I guess. I don't know if there's any sort of one sort of thing that sort of stands out. There's little things you remember along the way. Sort of making very unusual diagnoses and things like that. That's pretty exciting when you think a patient's got something that you remember hearing about at medical school and you've never ever seen. And you start looking up the textbooks and going, I'm pretty sure this is it. Sending them to the specialist who goes, it can't be that because it's too rare and you're a GP, you couldn't possibly get that right. And then they send you a letter back going, well, actually, it's very rare, but you got it right. So that happens not very often, but when it does happen, it's very enjoyable. That you've made the right call, or you've saved someone a lot of grief by diagnosing them early with something.
And it sounds like some of those early ambulance trips to Canberra were a little hairy at times?
Yeah, you get a lot of very interesting things. I remember being in the back of an ambulance with lights and sirens, and I think we were probably doing 130 or 140 kilometres an hour. A ute came up behind us and followed us probably a couple of metres behind the ambulance for a while, and then pulled out and overtook us and disappeared into the distance, going much faster than we were. Pretty interesting. Yeah, the ambulance officers weren't very thrilled by that. There were no police around, so they couldn't get anyone onto it. But yeah, just little interesting things like that. There've been some more exciting trips as well, transferring quite sick people up. Or there's one trip I did where we're transporting a child who was reasonably unwell but not terribly sick, and actually came across a car crash that had just happened probably 30 seconds before that had a lot of critically injured people. And that just turned into a big effort. We had helicopters flying and all sorts of things. So it sort of turned off from a reasonably straightforward transfer into a huge logistics complex nightmare. Yeah, that was interesting, pretty stressful, but mostly good outcomes.
So are there some areas of medicine that you're really interested in now, but thinking back to your medical student and intern days, if someone had said you'd be interested in them in 25 years' time, you would have said they're crazy?
Probably geriatrics now, strangely enough. Just with being in town for 25 years, the majority of my patients are older. So I've been looking after them for a long time, and a lot of the patients through the hospital now are older as well. So I have a big cohort of patients, probably over the age of 70. So I actually find that much more interesting than I thought I would, just sort of trying to keep them fit and healthy and as well as they can be without letting too many medications upset them or make them worse. So I find that much more interesting than I ever thought I would. Rural medicine's a bit like that, though. You can find your own sort of specialty or niche that you really like. I still really enjoy working at the hospital, which is strange. A lot of people find the hospital, especially rural hospitals, fairly stressful. They can be boring, they can be irritating, can be very crazy busy at times as well. But by and large, working in the hospital is fun.
What is it about working at the hospital that still really appeals to you, even after all these years?
I think it keeps you on your toes. I think you work with a lot of different people. You work with a lot of nurses, registrars coming through and things like that as well. So you're always learning things. You just get exposed to a lot of things. I think it's very easy to sort of get stuck in one little area of medicine that you become more and more specialised on. And from my point of view, working at the hospital sort of keeps me across a wider range of things. It would be very easy for me to stay in the rooms and perhaps just look after older patients or people with diabetes and things. And working in the hospital, you have to deal with sick kids and trauma and all of those sorts of things too. And that just keeps you a lot more confident in what you can do.
You mentioned registrars there, and I know you're involved in training the next generation of doctors, both at a medical student and registrar level. Tell me a little bit about your work in that area. What does it entail, and what does it mean to you as a doctor? How important has that part of your work or your medical journey been?
Well, I came here as a registrar. I think the doctors who are already on the practice had come here as registrars as well and stayed. So the practice that I'm in had a very strong teaching ethos. It's always been something that had been there. That always had medical students. At that time, it was mainly from Sydney medical students, but more recently, mainly from Canberra. And so we've always had a lot of registrars and medical students through the practice. And it's been something we all really enjoy. We always find it's interesting. The medical students always bring a different perspective. A lot of them have done a wide variety of things now before they get into medicine. So there's always interesting things they can bring along. Same with the registrars. We had a medical student here a couple of years ago who'd been a chiropractor, and it was just fascinating to be able to sort of talk to someone from a chiropractic background and sort of how that related to their medical training and things as well. And being able to discuss things, sort of increased my appreciation for what they could do, I guess, a little bit. But yeah, by and large, just having students and registrars, again, keeps you fresh. It stops you getting too stale and just makes the job more interesting. And teaching and training is fun as well, passing on things, trying to help them do things.
So tell me a little bit about the support you provide to registrars when they're in Cooma.
I know when I came here, we were lucky we had really good support from the doctors who were here in town. And I think as a registrar coming to a small town, you take on a lot of responsibility, and the feeling like you're isolated can be fairly overwhelming and quite scary. So with the registrars who come here, we always make sure they have really good support. So I give them all my phone number, tell them they can ring me at any time. And they do. They often leave here and go to other jobs, and I still get calls from them or emails occasionally asking questions because they know they can ring me up. And I'm slightly unusual in that I don't mind being interrupted too much with things. I know a lot of doctors really don't like having their train of thought disrupted, but I'm used to being interrupted. It's pretty much my life is constant interruptions, and I cope with that quite well. So I think that's really important for registrars and gives people a little bit more reassurance and makes the whole experience a lot more pleasant.
That must be quite rewarding when you have a registrar who's been in Cooma and moved away but is keen to speak with you from a distance to get some advice.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like some of the questions are quite interesting. So you get all sorts of questions and things. But yeah, and I think keeping that communication open is good. But I really think that support's one of the key things. I think a lot of people, especially with medicine and medico-legal things, people really worry about being isolated and being put in difficult positions without support. And I think being able to offer that's really important, and it's something I enjoy doing. But it's so much easier to communicate with people now. Like I get texts from registrars constantly, or phone calls and things as well. Not so much emails anymore. Emails take longer to make, but a lot of texts and things like that. And yeah, you can often quickly sort things out and make things easier for them.
Is your feeling that there's more enthusiasm for rural general practice from that younger cohort than there may have been 5 or 10 years ago?
Probably. It's sort of hard to know. I think we've always had a lot of really enthusiastic registrars and students through here. They all seem to really enjoy their time down here. I think the issue for them is there's a lot of barriers to getting into rural practice. If you want to become more of a specialist, then it's harder to do. For family commitments and things like that, that makes it hard for a lot of people to follow up sort of rural things as well. So there are a lot of barriers to getting to rural practice, but generally we find the registrars and students really enjoy their time here. Most of the registrars we have sort of sign up for 3 or 6 months and end up staying a lot longer than that.
So what's the main barrier to them in looking at rural practice as a career?
I think the biggest barrier really tends to be family. For most people, they want to be nearer their families if they've got a large family, or if they're married, their partner needs to be in the city for various reasons. It seems to be hard to find doctors who've got a partner who want to work in the country. It does happen, but a lot of people are really city focused, and even if they want to work down here, their partner or kids or various other people in their lives don't want them to.
Are there strategies for overcoming that, and are they being implemented, or is it a challenging area?
I think it's a challenging area. I don't think it's been fully explored as widely as it could be. I think there's a lot of potential strategies for maybe overcoming it. One of the things I've been thinking about recently is that there's a lot of doctors in the cities who have worked in rural areas. They've done rural time, and for various reasons, they've had to go back to the cities. And I really feel like they're an untapped resource, that they have a lot of skills. They work in the city and they bring those skills to the city, which is good. But I do wonder, there's a lot of rural towns within sort of 3 hours of big cities that can't get doctors. And these doctors are in the cities, and sort of trying to explore ways where we might be able to get them to come out. And I think the idea of having a doctor move to a rural town and be their sole doctor for 10 years is probably not going to happen much in the future, for a whole pile of reasons. And I wonder if a model where you have a lot of people rotating through a town, maybe 10 people rotating through a town and working there, doing sort of 3 days a fortnight, something like that is a more sustainable model where it's got a lot more resilience to it. If someone leaves, it's not the end of the world. People bring a range of skills to a small town as well. Part of the trouble with that, though, is travel time and things too. You can work in the city, you can just get up and go to work. But if you're having to get up and drive 3 hours to work, you want to be there for a day or two, and there needs to be some funding for that. But I think that's potentially a model that hasn't been explored as well as it could have here. It would involve some funding from the government, unfortunately. That's not as easy to get as it should be.
And this has been a key issue for you, I guess, in terms of Bombala, which is a community near to Cooma that's really had trouble retaining a GP over quite a few years. You've been instrumental in trying to fix that, and in fact you took over the local practice there to try and effect that change. It speaks to the challenges, though, that these smaller communities are facing in recruiting and retaining rural doctors. What strategies have you tried in Bombala, and have they been effective? And does that speak to a wider mechanism for attracting rural doctors to more rural communities?
Yeah, and I'd like to say I've got a magic solution, but I don't. Yeah, with Bombala, it was one of those towns that had a doctor who'd been there for a long time and had really kept the whole place running. Colin Pate, who's pretty much a legend in the area, he'd been there a very long time, provided a fantastic service for the community, but he'd recently had some health issues that meant he couldn't keep the high level of involvement that he had, and he sort of approached us to see if we could take over the practice. And yeah, in hindsight, it maybe wasn't the wisest move to say yes, but we did. And we've put a lot of time and effort in there. And so the practice, we've modernised a whole pile of things there. And at the moment, we've got a locum there who actually worked in the area in sort of a previous life many years ago, and has come back and working there at the moment. And he's staying there for a little while, so that's good. But I think it's going to be a struggle to keep getting a doctor for a place like Bombala. It's a nice place to work. There's a lot of really interesting medicine and things there, but it is pretty isolated. It's just far enough away from the city that it makes it hard to get to. From Canberra, it's sort of a couple of hours drive, and it's just hard enough to get there that it's not quite attractive enough.
Has it been more challenging than you expected when you took over that practice? Did you expect it to be an easier transition to get another doctor there?
Yeah, yes and no. I think at the time we took it over, there was a couple of doctors doing some part-time work as well. And for various reasons, retirements and things like that, they've left as well. And so for a little while there looked like there would be no doctor there at all. And so that got a little bit of publicity, and that actually helped us in some ways attract a locum to the area. That publicity was on the ABC media and things like that. And the doctor who's there at the moment, Keith, heard about that and approached us and said he could do some work for us short term. And he's been fantastic. He brings a wealth of skills to the area. He's really enthusiastic. So we're really lucky to have him there at the moment.
Part of that media was also around strategies that you believe government should be implementing to attract and retain rural doctors. What further strategies should be implemented to enable that?
Yeah, it's hard to know. There are strategies in place. There's various incentives and funding and things like that are in place. A lot of them seem to tie around the idea, though, that you'll have a doctor who moves to a rural area and stays there. And like I said before, I think that model has some benefits. I think there's a lot of doctors who do want to move to rural areas and stay there for a good length of time. But I think for a lot of other people, they've done rural work, they really like it, but for various reasons they have to be in cities. And I think that's it's almost a fly in, fly out model type thing for a lot of rural towns that are within a couple of hours of a big city. I think that probably needs to be explored more.
Do you think those sort of things are being looked at enough at the moment?
Probably not. I think rural medicine's a lot of people involved, and a lot of people have good ideas and a lot of people have bad ideas, and it's really just trying things that nothing really has worked. I mean, you can tell, you'll be able to tell when rural medicine is solved, because there'll be no vacancies in rural Australia if everyone wants. And we're a long way away from that at the moment. So I think it's a mixture of incentives and funding and things like that really need to be thrown at it for a solution.
So when you talk to medical students and junior doctors who are coming through your practice and the local hospital, what are they seeing as the main barriers, and is there a particular mix that's required to get them across the line?
There's a whole pile of issues with that. I think medical students, it's pretty varied. I think a lot of them come here knowing what they want to do, and often what they want to do is specialise, which is going to be in a city. So they come here for the experience. They usually have a great experience, and so that's good. I think just improving people's awareness of what rural medicine involves, even if they go on to become a city specialist, is always helpful for everyone concerned. I think for registrars, it's a slightly different problem. For registrars, there's a lot of training places at the moment and not many registrars, which seems counterintuitive. For a while, it looked like we wouldn't have enough training places, but there are plenty of training places. And one of the issues we really have as an ongoing problem is getting enough training places. We often have a lot of people apply to come here and have some fantastic applicants, and then we're told we can only have one trainee this year or something like that. And it's very annoying to have a couple of people you've been talking to since they're medical students, and they really want to come to the area. They want that mixture of working as a GP and working in a hospital. And then you have to say to them that we don't have a position for you. And so they go somewhere else. They maybe do GP work and they never really get that experience. And that could have been a transformative experience for them. Yeah, the GP and hospital work, and they might have decided, yes, that's really what they wanted to do. And I think that's probably one of the things that I find a bit sad and irritating, is that that really is not valued as highly as it should be. I think registrars working in rural areas is important, but there's a difference between working as a rural GP, where you're working in just a GP clinic in a rural area, and working as a procedural GP doing emergency medicine, looking after inpatients. And I'm not sure if the training organisations and the RACGP quite value that as highly as they could, that they don't really sort of put enough weight onto that and say this is a really good opportunity for registrars to get, and it should be prioritised, a little bit like anaesthetics and obstetrics and surgery has been with the rural generalist training recently.
Speaking of the rural generalist pathways, do you see those as the light at the end of the tunnel in terms of delivering more doctors with advanced skills to rural areas?
I think in some ways, like for advanced skills, yes. I think for GPs with anaesthetic skills, it's great. For GPs with obstetric skills, it's good as well. There just aren't enough of them, unfortunately. And then they tend to come from a system where they've had a lot of support. When they come to the country, they still need a lot of support. It's very easy to turn up somewhere as a GP obstetrician, have a terrible experience and go, I never want to do that again. So you really need to have an ecosystem around them where they can have good support and have a good experience and sort of develop their skills. So I think rural generalism is important. I think one of the parts of it that hasn't really been expanded or looked at enough is working in the emergency departments and hospitals. I think at the time when rural generalism sort of became a thing, that wasn't sort of a big issue. But if you look around most rural hospitals now, there's a lot of CMOs or GPs have just gone into that sort of rural ED work. And there's a lot of locums and there's a lot of cost to the system with it. And I think that probably needs to be pushed. I think having GPs working in rural ED departments as part of their workload is a good model. I think it improves everyone's health. I think it's good for the hospitals, it's good for the doctors.
And in terms of the next 10 years in Cooma, how do you see medical services and medical workforce issues panning out in your own town?
Yeah, it's interesting. We're always optimistic. We're actually doing okay at the moment, I think, doctor-wise. We're pretty lucky. We've had a couple of doctors sort of move to the area and buy houses and things recently, and we're lucky in that we've got a few sort of things to entice them to the area. The ski fields in particular are only a 1 hour drive from here, and that's a big draw for some people. Having said that, a lot of the doctors who come here never ski at all and hate the snow, so they come here for different reasons. But it is one of the things that does draw people, and we've had a couple of doctors recently move to the area, buy property for various reasons, for lifestyle or for skiing access or the mountains. And they're younger and they're probably the future for the area. So that's really nice to see that happening. So I'm reasonably positive about the medical future for Cooma. I think we're just big enough that we'll keep going along okay. I think for places a little bit smaller than us, it tends to be a bit more fraught and difficult.
Now, I know you have a lifelong love of skiing. What other interests do you have outside medicine, particularly in the summer months, I guess?
Yeah, the summer months I usually spend most of my time actually catching up from all the stuff I've ignored over the winter. So,
yes.
So usually in the winter I just work and ski and things. Everything else just builds up and builds up. I actually have a couple of other things I do as well. I do a fair bit of practice management or helping with our practice. So that involves a fair bit of time as well, teaching students and things too. Outside of that, I actually probably spend way too much time doing things with computers and things as well, which has generated some other sideline businesses and hobbies and things too.
And what about for the next 10 years for yourself and how you see your work in Cooma panning out?
I don't know if I'll be I definitely won't be working at the same level as I am now in 10 years' time. I'm probably working a bit harder now than I want to, and I blame most of that on COVID, actually.
Yes.
Where we've vaccinated a phenomenal number of people over the last few months, and just the logistics of expanding a practice so that you can suddenly vaccinate an extra 100 people a day through the practice has been a little more challenging than initially thought. So
Absolutely.
it's pretty busy. But yeah, no, I think it's one of the nice things with medicine in general, and especially rural medicine. It is a little bit easier to sort of reduce your time and your commitment to things. You can stop doing things that if you don't like doing them. I do very little night work now, which is nice. If I get rung up at night, it's usually to go in and help with the cesarean section or something like that. Doesn't happen very often, which is good. So yeah, I'm doing a lot less night work than I used to, which is appreciated by me. I like sleep, and probably over the next 10 years, I'll just gradually do a few less things as well.
And a bit more skiing.
Yeah, well, skiing's always good. I usually try and do as much of that as I can. So
Absolutely.
this year's been very mixed. We sort of weren't sure what was going to happen. We thought we'd be smashed with everyone from Sydney, and then they all got locked down. It actually turned into quite a good ski season with some quite good snow, until eventually it got locked down. But it's just opened up again in the last couple of days, but it's right at the end of the season. So
with some good snow cover still too.
Yeah, some pretty good snow cover, yeah.
Well, Hamish, congratulations again on receiving the award this year, and thanks very much for speaking with us today.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Yeah, it was a big surprise. I didn't know I'd been nominated for it, and I think it's one of these things where I imagine most people feel like it's undeserved. I can think of a dozen doctors who are fantastic rural doctors, and who, in my opinion, would probably deserve it more than me. I'm just very lucky that I had some nice people who nominated me without telling me. So I really appreciate it. And I think anything that brings rural medicine to more attention of people and gives it a higher media profile is always good. I'm very appreciative of it and very surprised, actually. So thank you.
And that was Dr Hamish Steiner, the RDAA Rural Doctor of the Year for 2021. I hope you've enjoyed this podcast, and I look forward to having you tune in again. Until next time, happy days.